You wouldn't know it, by the way. He's downplayed the earmark issue, but Senator Mitch McConnell is responsible for more pork than a Jimmy Dean sausage factory. According to Taxpayers for Common Sense, in the past 3 years, the Kentucky senator has requested nearly $1 billion worth of earmarks. In our number 2 story, turn out the lights, Mitch McConnell. The pork is over, and Democrats are hoping the filibuster might be next. In the first real battle between the establishment GOP and the Tea Party, the establishment has blinked. The minority leader, Mr. McConnell, last week was defending the earmark process, calling Tea Party Republican Jim DeMint's proposed moratorium, quote, symbolic. But with the Republican conference scheduled to vote on the measure tomorrow, this afternoon, McConnell caved in to his new Tea Party overlords.
I know the good that has come from the projects that I've helped support throughout my state. I don't apologize for them, but there is simply no doubt that the abuse of this practice has caused Americans to view it as a symbol of the waste and out-of-control spending that every Republican in Washington is determined to fight.
Meanwhile, Democrats are leading a movement to reform the filibuster process. According to The Hill, Senator Tom Udall said he will force a motion on the first day of the next Congress to have Vice President Joe Biden adopt new rules for the 2-year session. Then Udall said he will seek consensus among senators from both parties to lower the 60-vote threshold for procedural motions. The goal to end the ability of the party in the minority to obstruct the majority party's agenda from even reaching the Senate floor for votes. Cloture motions filed in the past several Congresses have skyrocketed. You can see the trend. It is gridlock in graphic form. Udall admits that he currently does not have the votes to change the Senate rules. But across the aisle last week, Republican retread Indiana Senator-elect Dan Coates admitted, quote, we need to remove the 60-vote rule for bringing a bill. Let's turn to Chris Hayes, the Washington editor of The Nation, also, of course, an MSNBC contributor. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening, Keith.
Start with filibuster. One, you would think that if the Democrats don't do it in the upcoming Senate, it will be done to them should the Republicans take over in 2 years. Is there going to be a larger Democratic groundswell to try to reform the filibuster process?
Well, a groundswell I haven't seen yet. I mean, you have seen some movement. You definitely saw it during health care. I mean, one of the things I think that's problematic is that there was a real groundswell around health care because people got a very colorful illustration of the problems of the filibuster and sort of everybody dealing for the 60th vote, and that created a real kind of mass consensus around the fact that this had to be changed. I think as we've gotten further away from that, there's been an ebbing in the amount of pressure there is on the issue, and I think that's problematic. But I do think you see Senator Udall, you see Senator Harkin, there are other people who, if you go through the record, there's probably about 15, 20, 25 senators who have said something on the record about their openness to filibuster reform. So I really hope that Senator Udall does push the issue because it's important, even if it doesn't work at the opening of this new Congress, to get everybody on the record.
Is this one of those political party offense-defense questions? I mean, if the Democrats want to play defense, they'll let reform on this die, so the Republicans have no chance of being free from the filibuster if they gain the majority in 2012. But if the Democrats want to play offense, they should push this on the presumption that what they could then get done in the next 2 years would make holding the Senate easier in 2012, right?
I think that's right. I mean, I think there's two things. I think there's a cultural distinction between the Democratic and Republican caucus and their ethos. I mean, Republicans tend to be maximalists. Democrats tend to be incrementalists. And we've seen this manifest itself in all sorts of ways, particularly since 1994 and going through, and the way that the different senators conduct themselves, particularly on the Senate side. So I think that's one issue. I think the point you made in the first question is really important to hammer home. For all the Democrats that are uneasy about filibuster reform, that are thinking to themselves, well, we don't want to be in the situation where we can't block things where we're in the minority, you should think long and hard about whether you think the Republicans are going to preserve the filibuster if they are in the majority. Because remember, they thought it was such a threat to the Republic that judges were getting filibustered. They were ready to blow the thing up a few years ago, and now judges are getting filibustered routinely, and everybody sort of shrugs and it's business as usual.
Senator Harkin on filibuster reform. It is about the Senate as an institution operating more fairly, effectively, and democratically. And yet all the talk of doing this is from incumbent Democrats. Where are some of those Tea Party, don't tread on me, fair is fair, voice of the people guys?
Well, I think it's important to remember the filibuster is, even though it's sort of viewpoint neutral, right? I mean, it can be invoked by minorities of either party. It fundamentally has played a reactionary role in American politics. So if you look at the history of it in the 20th century, it's been invoked primarily against labor law reform and against civil rights, and now it's become so casually sort of invoked by this sort of Republican obstructionists. there is a nature to the filibuster which is fundamentally, I think, small c conservative, and so I'm not surprised that you're not seeing Tea Party candidates clamor to get it changed.
And back to earmarks, McConnell flipping here. Is that the Tea Party eating the establishment, or is it some sort of shrewd move from McConnell to co-opt the Tea Party platform?
Well, I think it's true. I mean, here's what I would say. This is the very beginning of what's going to be a long relationship. I mean, there was a lot of things that the new Gingrich Congress did in '95 when they came into power, and they quickly petered out, right? So let's check back in a few years and see if Rand Paul isn't sneaking some earmarks into appropriations bills. But I actually will say, in a somewhat contrarian sense, to the degree that you think the current economy of influence in Congress and the status quo is fundamentally corrupt, which I do think, and I don't think earmarks are at all the center of that corruption, but you can make an argument that they're a sort of symptom of it. I do think it's encouraging to see that status quo disrupted, even if it's for a distraction, even if earmarks really aren't the problem. I'm ultimately heartened by the fact that McConnell buckled in this instance. It's very hard to be on the side of Mitch McConnell in anything, I have to say. And to the extent that things actually changed because of an election, I guess I'm so desperate to see this political system react to voter input that I'm actually encouraged by it.
Chris Hayes of The Nation and MSNBC, marking no ears and bustering no fellas. Thank you, Chris.
Putting that on my business card. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, sir.